He stumbled into the service station, looking like he had been dragged out of the ground. Dirt clung to his hair and his clothes. His face was swollen, one eye badly injured, and he moved with the stiff, delayed reactions of someone running on shock. The cashier saw him take 2 uneven steps toward the counter. His mouth opened, and he forced out a request that didn't fit what he looked like. He asked for a taxi. Then his legs gave out, and he hit the floor. The man was 23. Police did not release his name publicly. They later said he was from New South Wales, and that he had survived an attempted killing that should have ended with his body hidden forever. In July 2024, detectives believed he had been targeted by people they described as a contract crew, a group allegedly linked to organized drug trafficking violence. The attempted murder was one of several brutal incidents investigators said unfolded over 6 days across New South Wales and Queensland. Before he ever reached that service station, police said he was abducted. The details of how he was lured or grabbed were not publicly laid out in full, but investigators treated it as deliberate and planned. He was moved across state lines. By the time he was in Queensland, he was in the hands of people who did not intend to negotiate or let him go. At some point, he was shot in the head. Reporting later said the bullet went through his eye. The shot was meant to be final, the kind of wound that ended the story immediately. It didn't. Doctors and forensic specialists have explained that survival from a gunshot to the head was possible, but it depended on small angles and brutal luck. A projectile could pass through tissue without striking the structures that controlled breathing and heart rhythm. A round could lose energy. A fraction of an inch could decide whether a person died on the spot or stayed alive long enough to reach help. Even when someone survived, they could live with severe neurological damage, seizures, vision loss, and lifelong impairment. The people who shot him believed they had done what they came to do. Police said he was buried alive in a shallow grave near Jimboomba, Queensland. The intent was clear: hide the victim, erase the crime, leave nothing for investigators to find. Whoever dug that hole walked away expecting silence. Instead, there was movement. Sometime after he was left there, the man emerged. Police and media later described it as a miracle. The simplest truth was that he got out. He reached open air, and with a bullet still lodged inside his skull, he began moving toward the nearest place where another human being might see him. He did not have the clean focus of someone running a plan. He had the blunt momentum of survival. He walked until he found lights and a building and a door that opened. Security cameras later captured him entering a service station, still covered in dirt, still unsteady on his feet. The footage became a kind of proof that the story wasn't an exaggeration. Inside the store, he tried to speak. He asked for a taxi. It sounded almost ordinary, like someone whose car had broken down. But his body told the real story. He collapsed moments later, and the people around him finally understood they were looking at a man who had been left for dead. Emergency responders were called. When paramedics arrived, they were not dealing with a typical assault victim. Police later described the injury as a gunshot wound to the head, and reporters said the projectile had entered through the man's eye. He was dirty, disoriented, and badly hurt, but he was alive long enough to be transported for urgent treatment. Surgeons and intensive care staff did what modern medicine could do: stabilize, manage bleeding and swelling, prevent the brain from being crushed by its own inflammation, and fight off the secondary injuries that often killed survivors days later. The outcome could have gone either way, and investigators later referred to his survival as extraordinary. He survived. That survival turned an attempted disappearance into an investigation that could not be ignored. A dead victim couldn't describe what happened. A living victim forced a case to stay open, forced a timeline to be built, forced detectives to ask who did it, how, and why. Police treated the incident as attempted murder and connected it to a broader pattern of organized violence. In New South Wales, Detectives were also examining a kidnapping and torture they said occurred on July 19, 2024, in Canley Vale. Police described a 31-year-old man being abducted, assaulted, and partially mutilated before being released. Investigators later pointed to that incident as part of the same violent run. Then there was the murder that anchored the case in the public eye. A man named Rich Dylan Choop, 32, was reported missing at the end of July 2024. Weeks later, his body was found in bushland near Lucas Heights. Police said he had been shot. They also described signs of mutilation. To detectives, it looked like a message, something meant to punish, frighten, or enforce control. More than a year later, investigators spoke publicly about the case and appealed for information. They released CCTV images and asked the public to help identify people and vehicles connected to the violence. Police described a structured cruelty, the kind that didn't happen in a sudden rage, but in steps, as if the offenders expected to get away with it. Police later said they waited before speaking publicly because the investigation needed to remain covert. When they finally asked for help, they described the violence as connected, not isolated. A kidnapping and torture in Sydney, an attempted murder in Queensland, and a fatal shooting that ended with a body left in bushland. Detectives appealed for information about people captured on cameras and vehicles seen moving between locations. They said the pattern suggested paid offenders acting on orders, the kind of crew hired to collect a debt, punish a mistake, or send a warning that would be understood without words. For investigators, the survivor was proof that the violence had gone wrong for the attackers. Someone had been left underground, and the plan still failed. That meant mistakes, and mistakes meant leads. It meant there were minutes to reconstruct, phone signals to trace, cameras to review, travel routes to map. It meant the story could be pursued as a sequence instead of a rumor. The 23-year-old survivor remained at the center of that story, even as details about him stayed limited. Later reporting said he did not fully cooperate with investigators and was in custody on unrelated matters. Whatever his choices afterward, the fact of what happened to him remained unchanged. He was shot in the head. He was buried alive. He got out, and he walked into a service station covered in dirt, asked for a taxi, and collapsed in front of witnesses. In a world where people vanished every day without leaving a trace, he left one. He left footage. He left hospital records. He left a living, breathing contradiction to the idea that the grave always won. He did not just survive an injury. He survived a method meant to erase him. A shallow grave was supposed to end the search before it began. He turned it into a crime scene that could talk, a set of wounds that could be examined, and a timeline that could be built around a single fact that mattered most. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.